My parents forced me to cancel my plans for my sister's party, so I finally took a stand, walked away, and took back my freedom. I'm 25F and I have finally realized something about my family. No matter what I do, no matter how much I sacrifice, I will never be as important to them as my younger sister, Emma, 19F. For as long as I can remember, Emma has been the center of the universe. If she wanted something, she got it. If she messed up, someone else got blamed. And if there was ever a situation where she and I had conflicting needs, well, guess whose needs always came first? Here's the thing. This isn't just some petty sibling rivalry. I have spent my entire life being second place in my own family. And last week was the moment that finally broke me. I was forced, once again, to cancel something important for myself because my parents needed me to focus on Emma instead. But this time, I didn't just go along with it. This time, I decided that if they weren't going to put me first, then I would. So, let me take you back to the beginning. Emma and I were raised in the same house, but we lived in two completely different worlds. I was the responsible one, the mature child, the one who followed the rules and didn't cause trouble. Meanwhile, Emma was the baby, the sensitive one, the one whose emotions dictated everything in the house. If Emma threw a tantrum, my parents dropped everything to comfort her. If Emma didn't feel like doing chores, I had to do extra so she wouldn't get overwhelmed. If Emma was struggling with something in school, my parents made me tutor her. I still remember my 12th birthday party. It was supposed to be a small backyard gathering with a few friends from school, but Emma, who was only 6 at the time, decided that she was feeling left out. Lucian, my parents turned my birthday into a shared celebration. They brought out a cake with both our names on it and even gave Emma a pile of presents that were nicer than what I got. When I asked why, my mom sighed and said, "Sweetie, you're older. You understand. Emma just wants to feel special too." That phrase, "you're older, you understand," became my entire childhood. And no matter how much I understood, it never seemed to matter when I needed something. Fast forward to now. I'm 25, I have my own job, and I live on my own. I've worked really hard to get to this point, and for the first time in my life, I was about to do something just for me. I had planned an amazing weekend trip with a group of friends, a real getaway. We'd booked a cabin near a gorgeous hiking spot, planned out every meal, and even had tickets to a festival happening nearby. It wasn't just a vacation, it was something I had been looking forward to for months. I had put in the PTO request at work, paid for everything in advance, and set aside time to make it happen. And then, 4 days before my trip, I got the call, my mom. I should have let it go to voicemail, but I didn't. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with that tone she used whenever she was about to ask me for something. "Listen, we have a tiny favor to ask you. I already knew I wasn't going to like it." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "It's about Emma's birthday party," she said, way too excitedly. I internally groaned. "What about it?" "Well, you know how much she looks up to you," my mom continued, as if this was leading to some kind of compliment. "And she really wants her big sister to be there for her special day." I frowned. "Wait, when is the party?" "Oh, it's this Saturday." My stomach dropped. "Mom, you know I have my trip this weekend." She made a little dismissive sound, like I had just told her I was busy doing laundry. "Oh, I know, sweetheart, but can't you reschedule? It would mean so much to Emma if you were there." I felt my jaw clench. I've been planning this trip for months. Everything is booked. I can't just cancel. My mom sighed dramatically, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. "Honey, you know how sensitive Emma is. She was so upset when she thought you weren't coming. We tried to explain that you had plans, but she just started crying, and you know how she gets." Of course. Emma cried, and suddenly I was expected to fix it. "I'm sorry she's upset," I said, keeping my voice as even as possible. "But I'm not canceling my trip." Silence. Then the guilt trip began. "So you're just going to let your baby sister sit there on her birthday and feel like she's not important to you?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Mom, she's 19. She's not a baby. She's still your sister. Family is supposed to come first." "No," I said, my voice sharper now. "Emma comes first. Always." My mom gasped, like I had just cursed her out. "That's not true." "Yes, it is," I snapped. "Every single time there's a choice between what I want and what Emma wants, you always pick her. Always." "That's not fair." No, Mom, what's not fair is expecting me to put my entire life on hold because Emma threw a tantrum. I'm not doing it. You're being so selfish right now. I let out a bitter laugh. You know what? Maybe it's about time I was. And then, for the first time in my life, I hung up on her. I stood there, heart pounding, hands shaking as I processed what just happened. They had spent years expecting me to be the quiet, agreeable daughter who just went along with things. But I wasn't that little girl anymore, and for once, I wasn't going to let them ruin this for me. I was going on my trip. Emma's party would have to go on without me. And if my family had a problem with that, well, they were about to learn that I wasn't their doormat anymore. The second I hung up, my phone started buzzing. Mom, ignored, then Dad, ignored again, then, predictably, Emma. I almost turned my phone off, but I knew if I didn't respond, she'd just escalate. So I opened the message. She was pissed. Apparently, me not showing up to her birthday party was the equivalent of spitting in her face. She went on and on about how humiliating this was for her, how everyone was expecting me to be there, and how now she'd have to explain why her own sister doesn't care about her. I stared at my screen, already regretting engaging. I told her I had planned this trip for months, that I wasn't canceling just because she decided my presence was mandatory. Emma wasn't having it. She went straight for guilt. It was just one day, she said. What was I even doing that was so important? Wasn't family more important than a random weekend trip? That last part made me laugh. Random? This wasn't some spontaneous outing. I had worked for this, scraped together my PTO, budgeted, made reservations, paid for everything out of my own pocket. But according to Emma, none of that mattered, because it wasn't about her. I told her no, flat out no. She left me on read, which, honestly, best case scenario, or so I thought. An hour later, my mom called again. When I didn't pick up, she left a voicemail. Stupidly, I listened to it. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is just cruel. Emma has always looked up to you, and now you're just abandoning her on her birthday? I hope this trip is worth hurting your family. I let out a dry laugh. There it is, the same old song and dance. Emma was always the victim, and I was always the bad guy. I had spent my entire life being expected to understand, to step aside, to make room for Emma's needs, Emma's wants, Emma's feelings. And now that I was finally saying no, now I was cruel, I was so sick of it. I put my phone on silent, tossed it onto my bed, and tried to focus on packing. 2 hours later, there was a knock at my door. I knew. Before I even opened it, I knew. I swung it open, and sure enough, Mom. She gave me that disappointed frown, the one she always used when she wanted me to feel ashamed of myself. We need to talk. I folded my arms. I already told you I'm not canceling my trip. She sighed dramatically, stepping inside without an invitation. Why are you being so stubborn? It's just one night. And I already made plans. She sat on the couch like she was settling in for a long, exhausting conversation. Honey, Emma is devastated. She was crying earlier. She really thought you'd be there for her. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Emma always cries when she doesn't get her way. Mom gasped, like I had said something horrific. That's not fair. She's sensitive. I let out a humorless laugh. No, she's spoiled. There's a difference. She pressed her lips together, clearly trying to be patient, but I could see the cracks in her fake calm. Look, I get that you've been looking forward to this trip, but Emma's birthday only happens once a year. And I only get this vacation once. Do you think I just get unlimited time off? Mom waved a hand, brushing off the argument. You can always go another weekend, and Emma can have her birthday without me there. She blinked, like she physically couldn't process that. But she wants you there. I sat down across from her. Mom, be honest. If the roles were reversed, if I had my birthday planned on a weekend, Emma had a trip, would you be sitting in her apartment begging her to cancel? Silence. She knew. We both knew. She sighed, rubbing her temples. It's not the same. It's exactly the same. She looked tired now, like this whole thing was such a burden on her. What are you doing this? Because I'm tired of feeling like I don't matter. My voice was steady, but I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I've spent my whole life stepping aside for Emma. This time, I'm not. Her eyes softened, like she was about to shift tactics. Sweetheart, that's not true. It is true. You always expect me to be the one who gives in. I'm supposed to be the mature one, the understanding one, and you know what? I was, for years, but not this time. She sighed again, like she was so exhausted by my selfishness. I just don't want this to cause a rift in the family. I stared at her, stunned. You don't want a rift? I let out a bitter laugh. Mom, there's already a rift. You just never cared when it was me on the losing side of it. She opened her mouth to argue, but I stood up. I'm done talking about this. I'm going on my trip. If Emma is that upset, that's her problem, not mine. Mom's eyes hardened. If you walk away from this, don't expect us to be so forgiving. I inhaled sharply, my stomach twisting, but then something inside me clicked. I had spent years being scared of disappointing them, of being the bad daughter. But standing there, staring at my mother's angry, manipulative expression, I realized something. I didn't care anymore. I was walking away, and for the first time I felt free. She must have sensed the shift because her expression faltered. I grabbed my bag, opened the door, and gestured toward it. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should leave. Her jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but at least it's my mistake. For the first time in my life, I shut the door on her, and I didn't regret it. 2 days later, I was in the mountains, surrounded by friends, breathing in the crisp, clean air of absolute peace. My phone stayed off. No guilt, no pressure, no Emma throwing a tantrum. And when I finally turned my phone back on, the fallout was spectacular. When I turned my phone back on, it nearly exploded. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for whatever storm had brewed while I was off actually enjoying my life. I had no regrets about going on my trip. Those few days away were some of the most freeing I'd ever experienced. No pressure, no guilt, just me and my friends having an amazing time. But now, reality was waiting. I scrolled through the notifications, already knowing what to expect. Mom had sent multiple texts, each one getting progressively angrier. It started off passive-aggressive. I hope you're happy. Emma was devastated. Then came the guilt. I don't know how you could do this to your own sister. Do you even care about your family anymore? Then straight up rage. Don't bother coming home if you're going to be this selfish. Dad's messages were shorter, but just as frustrating. You should have been there. Mom's upset. Fix this. The real masterpiece, though? Emma's meltdown. She had left at least a dozen messages, all over the place emotionally. First, the betrayal. Wow, I cannot believe you did this to me. Then the guilt trip. I spent my whole birthday miserable because of you. I presume you're the worst sister ever. Then the self-victimization. I bet you had fun while I was sitting there wondering why my own family doesn't love me. And finally, the tantrum. Don't even talk to me again. We're done. You're dead to me. I stared at my phone, exhaling slowly. I wasn't even mad, just tired. I had spent my whole life giving in to them, playing the role of the good, responsible daughter, always backing down to keep the peace. And now, the moment I finally put myself first, they lost their minds. It was almost funny. I put my phone down, grabbed some coffee, and sat with my thoughts for a while. Normally, this would have wrecked me. I would have spent days overthinking, feeling guilty, trying to find a way to make it right. But this time, I felt fine. No, actually, I felt great. I wasn't going to play their game anymore. Mom wanted me to come crawling back, apologizing for choosing myself. Not happening. Dad expected me to just fix it without anyone taking responsibility. Not my job. And Emma? If she wanted to throw a tantrum and act like I had committed some unforgivable crime, let her. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to feel bad for finally taking back control of my own life. And apparently, that made them even angrier. Because 3 days after I got back, I got an unexpected visitor. Mom. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, knocking aggressively like she was about to serve me legal papers. I debated not answering, but part of me wanted to see what she had to say. I opened the door, and the first thing she did was push past me and walk inside. Not a hello, not a can we talk, just straight into my home like she still had control over me. I folded my arms, watching as she turned to face me, already fuming. Are you happy now? I blinked. Yeah, actually. I had a great trip. Thanks for asking. Her eyes narrowed. You know what I mean, I sighed. Mom, if you came here to yell at me, I really don't have time for this. You don't have time? She let out a bitter laugh. That's rich, considering you just had all the time in the world to run off on some vacation while your family fell apart. I stared at her. Fell apart? Over a birthday party? Over your selfishness. She was getting heated now, arms crossed, voice rising. Do you have any idea how hurt Emma was? She spent the whole night miserable because of you. I shrugged. That's not my fault. I told you from the start I wasn't coming. If she spent the whole night miserable, that's on her. Mom gasped like I had just said the most heartless thing imaginable. You really don't care, do you? I sighed. I do care. I care about my own happiness, for once. I care about not being treated like an afterthought whenever Emma wants something. I care about setting boundaries, which is exactly what I did. She shook her head, looking at me like I was some unrecognizable stranger. You've changed. That made me smile. Yeah, I have. She let out a frustrated breath, pacing a little. This isn't how family is supposed to work. We support each other. We show up for each other. No, Mom, I was always expected to show up. Emma got whatever she wanted. You never put the same expectations on her. That's not true, she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. So if it had been my birthday and Emma had a trip planned, would you have expected her to cancel? Silence. Just like last time. Because she knew. We both knew. I nodded. Exactly. Her jaw tightened. This isn't about fairness. It's about family. No. It's about control, I said. And I'm not playing along anymore. She was fuming now, her face red, hands clenching. You don't mean that. I do, she exhaled sharply. Well, if this is how you're going to treat your family, then maybe you should stop expecting us to be there for you when you need something. There it was. The ultimatum. The you need us more than we need you threat. But what she didn't realize? I had never needed them. They had needed me. To be the peacekeeper, the one who understood, the one who sacrificed and made everything easier for everyone else. And now that I wasn't playing along, they didn't know what to do. I smiled. Noted. She stared at me for a long time, waiting for me to break, to back down, to beg. I didn't. Finally, she scoffed, shaking her head like I was some lost cause. I hope you're happy. I actually am. That was the last thing I said before I walked to my door and held it open for her. She stood there for a second, lips pressed into a tight line, then stormed out. And just like that, I was free. For the first time in years, I felt light. No guilt, no shame, no second guessing. They could be mad, they could whine, they could play the victim. That wasn't my problem anymore. I had finally taken back my freedom. And I wasn't giving it up ever again. After my mom stormed out of my apartment, I half expected the guilt to creep in. That little voice in the back of my mind, whispering that I should have handled it differently, that I should be the bigger person. But for the first time in my life, it didn't come. Instead, I felt relief. I sat on my couch, staring at the door she had just walked out of, and all I could think was, that was it? That was the worst they could do? Because let's be real, their threats, their anger, their guilt trips, none of it actually meant anything. The only power they ever had over me was the power I let them have. And now, I wasn't letting them have it anymore. The next few days were quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was weird, but not in a bad way. More like my brain had been trained to expect chaos, and now that it wasn't there, it didn't know what to do with itself. Then, finally, the silence broke. Emma posted a long, dramatic message on social media about how birthdays reveal who really cares about you, and how she never expected betrayal to come from family. She didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious. Comments poured in. Some people ate it up, telling her they were sorry she had such a selfish sister. Others, people who actually knew me, weren't so sympathetic. One of my cousins straight up commented, "Didn't she tell you weeks ago she had plans? Grow up. I wanted to buy that guy a drink." A few distant relatives messaged me privately, trying to get the real story. I gave them nothing, let them wonder. Let them ask Emma why she was so devastated that her adult sister, Gasp, went on a pre-planned trip instead of catering to her for one day. My parents didn't reach out at all. Not gonna lie, that part stung a little. Even after everything, some tiny, stupid part of me thought maybe, just maybe, they'd take a second to think about it, to realize how unfair they had been, to see my side, even just a little. But no, their silence was their answer. And that's when it really hit me. I had spent years bending over backward to please people who never did the same for me, and the second I put up a boundary, they decided I wasn't worth the effort. That told me everything I needed to know. So I let them be silent. I focused on me. I threw myself into work. Hung out with friends more, even took another trip. Not out of spite, just because I could. Life got better. And then, a few months later, the inevitable happened. Mom called. I saw her name pop up on my phone and just stared at it for a minute. Part of me debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. I answered, "Hello?" She hesitated, then sighed. "So, are you done being stubborn?" I almost laughed. Classic mom. No. "Hey, how are you?" No, "I miss you." Just straight to, "Well, have you learned your lesson?" I leaned back in my chair. "I don't think I'm the one being stubborn." She ignored that. "It's been months. Don't you think it's time to move past this?" "Move past what?" I asked. "Me setting a boundary? Me deciding I'm done being treated like I don't matter?" She groaned like I was being so unreasonable. "God, you sound just like your father." That caught me off guard. "What?" She hesitated again. "He thinks we should just let you be. That you're an adult and we can't force you to do anything." I blinked. Dad said that? I hadn't talked to him at all since the fallout. Honestly, I assumed he had written me off completely, but apparently he was the one telling her to back off? Interesting. "So why are you calling?" I asked. She huffed. "Because Emma's birthday is coming up again and she wants you there." I almost dropped my phone. Had she really learned nothing? I let out a slow breath. "Mom, did you even consider asking if I wanted to be there? Or did you just assume I'd show up because Emma wants me to?" "Oh, don't start that again," she snapped. "She's reaching out. She's trying to move forward. Why can't you just do the same?" I laughed. I actually laughed. "You mean like how I tried to set boundaries last year and she threw a tantrum? Like how I spent months being called selfish just because I had plans? Like that?" She was silent. I shook my head. "Yeah." "No, I'm not going." "Oh, for God's sake, it's just a party." "And it was just a trip when I wanted to go?" I shot back. Another silence. She knew, we both knew. But she still couldn't bring herself to admit it. I sighed. "Look, I'm not mad anymore. But I'm also not going to pretend everything is fine just because it's convenient for you. If Emma wants a relationship with me, she can reach out herself. And not with a passive-aggressive social media post. A real conversation." Mom made a frustrated noise. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said calmly. "I'm just done." She started to argue again, but I didn't care. I hung up, and it felt amazing. That was 6 months ago. Emma never reached out. Mom texted once or twice with little guilt-trippy messages. "I hope you're doing well. Your sister misses you." But I didn't respond. Dad, weirdly enough, sent me a short text one day. "Hope you're happy. Take care of yourself." It wasn't much, but it was something, and as for me, I'm good. Better than I ever was when I was bending over backward to please people who didn't appreciate it. I've built a life that isn't controlled by their expectations. I have plans. I have freedom. I have peace. And I'm never giving that up again.